Welcome to HortTube. My name is John Putnam. In this video, we're going to show off some things that are in flower in the early March garden here in Raleigh, North Carolina. We had an all-day rain yesterday, so some of the bulbs that we'll be showing off this morning are a little weighted down, but they're really beautiful. Yesterday during a rainy day and this morning with a little bit of water covering them. I've talked about several times on daffodils, make sure that we try to put them where we realize they're going to kind of be a little bit south facing this time of year. When they're in bloom, the sun is still coming up slightly in the southeast and setting in the southwest, and they will point, the vast majority of them will point toward the sun, especially the morning sun. And so these are just absolutely perfect here on the north side of the property because they all, every single one of these stares right back into the driveway and across the garden. There are also some blueberries planted over here. There's a couple rabbit eye blueberries. These haven't opened the flowers quite yet. I'll show you one that is in flower in just a second. These large yellow ones right here are called Gigantic Star. And this little group right here, their second season in the ground. Last year, they were decent size, but they weren't what I would call gigantic. Here in the second season, they're a little bit tall. They are taller than the other ones, so they definitely belong behind other ones. And it may not make sense the first year, and it didn't last year, but this second year it definitely makes sense. They're no question that they're taller than the other ones in the garden, and I would imagine this will stand out more in the future as well. But this one's a very vigorous one, comes back reliably here for us in Raleigh. And daffodils are, overall pretty easy. The one in front of that one is called Ice Follies. I love when it has a different color in the center. Has the different color petals. So many of those stand out so well, and we'll see a couple more of those coming up. This mass planting around these blueberries works really, really well. We also have some ground cover, St. John's wort that's down a little bit down in the middle of them as well, and that'll kind of take over this space as these daffodils are in the process of declining. And then if I come over here, this blueberry is a southern high bush variety, and it already has the flowers open. And so the blueberries you're going to buy are based on how many chill hours your area gets. And I've got a series of blueberry videos on the channel if you want to learn a little more about that. This I Declare, all of these are Southern Living Plant Collection ones, but this one is a very low chill blueberry, and it can be grown in the southeast really well, almost more southeast than where I'm at right now, like north, in Florida and South Georgia, that kind of thing, where you really get very few chill hours. For me, this one almost blooms a little too early, had bees all over it the other day. At this point, with these totally open flowers and another 5 weeks before our average last frost date, there is some possibility these flowers could get damaged, as they've been pollinated already. So we may end up having to throw a blanket or a towel over this one, but it's worth the risk a little bit because this one, not only does it flower early and gets the berries set early, it also matures the berries very, very quickly, which is also nice because it's this risk of between the time something flowers and the time something's finished where you'd be picking it. The shorter that window can be, the better for things that could go wrong. So super excited this first year that this thing's really, really in full bloom. Again, this one's I Declare. More typical are the rabbit eye blueberries on the other side over there for my area here in Raleigh because they need between like 500 and 700 chill hours. We have several dwarf daffodils out here in the garden. This species is Bulbocodium. I think it's Narcissus bulbocodium. So the genus for daffodils is Narcissus. And then there are different species. Bulbocodium has these really, really interesting, very interesting flowers on them. They tend to be dwarfish like this. This one's called Mary Poppins. It's probably was the first daffodil we had blooming out here. They're a little weighted down from the water where it rained overnight, but they're really interesting, tiny little bulbs. They look great on little edges like this. We have a few other plantings along the street, just in a little spot where nothing else is going on. And then, here we are. They were blooming mid-February, and still a few of them, a few of the clusters. Just some of it depends on how much sun you know, something is getting, how much the soil is warming up in one spot versus another, but this is kind of the last one that still looks pretty fresh at this point. We have lots of groupings of this one called Pink Charm around the garden, and again, it's another one of these that really stands out in the garden, especially you put anything against white like this, it's really going to stand out. And we have, you know, again, where we're trying to plant some of these bulbs where this foliage is not going to look great. You know, post-flowering, there's a period of time where that foliage is not going to look great. We have some other perennials that come up in this spot. We have an evergreen pine. We have an agave next to it. And then there'll be a series of bulbs coming up in the garden as well. There's some species tulips out in the front, and one of them is starting to show a little color here, but there are lots of species tulips that tend to be a little bit later in the garden, so all of it's just kind of staged out, but do love this one, Pink Charm. Here's another really good southern one. This one's called Barrett Browning, and these were just planted at the time that this little pansy border was put in back in the late fall. We planted the pansies a little later than we usually do, and planted these daffodils a little later, so they'll be bigger, better, fuller next year, but they look great this year. This is another one with the light color petals and that darker corolla in the middle. It just really stands out from a long way across the garden. It's like putting a almost like a green screen behind it, you know, so that, you know, that it really stands out, and, you know, kind of various sizes on them right there. There's some other daffodils right back here behind it that you'll notice aren't open yet. We do have them staged out here where, you know, the little Mary Poppins bulbocodium, the dwarf one over there, was one of the first ones to be blooming. We had some irises that have already bloomed out. We have several of the bulbs that have already bloomed out, lots of them peaking today, and then ones that are a little bit later. We have some species tulips in the garden. Most of those are, lots of them are up, but not blooming yet. We'll show those off in a later video. The kind of hybrid tulips that people think of when they think of tulips, you know, the little cups that are so beautiful, can be a little weird here in the South. We have to cold treat them because we don't get enough winter cold on them before they go in the ground. And then typically winter over winter over winter, they just kind of disappear a bit. You know, they're really treated as, should be almost treated as annuals if you're using them. We did put some in this little border here, and they're doing okay. And the flowers are getting slightly taller, but you can see how dwarven they are. This is where we just didn't get hardly any cold out here over this winter, and they should be, you know, several inches taller than that. They're going to elongate some, and they have in the last 24 hours, but they're just not going to ever get kind of normal size, nor is the foliage. That's just what can happen. So we're trying to pick more and more bulbs that we just don't have to really think about, that are more for the South, just specifically for the South. One of our absolute favorite daffodils, this one's called Avalanche, and you can see the multiple flowers on each stem. So the flowers are a little smaller, but you get lots of flowers on every stem. That little yellow corolla is very showy. This one is incredibly fragrant, and I mean really fragrant. It's just amazing how much those tiny little flowers can stand out. And on this, kind of in a slightly shadowy space, and those white flowers really stand out in those kind of dark spaces. This is another smaller one with a slightly smaller flower. This one's called Kedron. These are leaning over again because it got rained on. As soon as this water's off of them, they'll start to stand back up. Heck, that's half of it right there, just knocking that little bit of water off. Again, beautiful. I love that orange against that yellow is quite a standout here in the garden. This one has a kind of a narrower foliage than some of the others. And then there's a hyacinth here. It's also fragrant. This one's called Yellowstone. This one's been a really good performer here in the garden. These have been here a couple of years, and normally hyacinths kind of do the same thing for us as tulips do. They kind of go backwards over time. Like the best year is going to be the first year. But this one has come back reliably. It seems to not need quite as much cold treatment as some of the others. Including the bulbocodium over there are 4 dwarf daffodils in the Raleigh garden here, and this one is called Hawara. Again, it's one of these with each stem has multiple flowers on it, which is definitely different than what we normally think of with with daffodils. And this one is very showy. Again, it's got that narrow foliage, almost like an onion or a chive or something like that. Really interesting foliage. The flowers stand up big and tall. Those bright yellows, of course, will stand out anywhere and everywhere. Back behind it there, the epimedium is starting to flower. I showed it off last week, but I just did some pruning on it, and now the flower spikes are just coming. You know, this will be these really beautiful yellow, delicate flowers will just kind of take over this plant in the next week or two. They're the most intricate little flowers. You know, it's amazing something that small can have that much detail. In it. There is a hellebore in the back. This is sparkling diamond. This is probably the longest blooming hellebore we have by far. It just starts off it opens to a really, really bright white and then fades to green, greenish color, spent flower. That almost looks, I mean, even the spent flower is a pretty good looking flower. This is the longest bloom one. I don't know how long it'll bloom this year, but last year it was blooming well into May, which was just completely wild for any hellebore. I love the foliage on it, love the flowers on it. Bigger, better, fuller each year. Here's another one of these daffodils with the multiple flowers on it, and this one these are doubles, so it's a big full white flower. This one's called Early Cheer. This one has come back reliably for us 3 years in a row. They're a little shorter than some other ones that are in this space, and so it turns out they're slightly out of place. That can happen in the garden. You put something in, you think it's going to, these are a little more covered up than I would like. They need to come out to the front of a bed somewhere, but there you go. This is a nice little planting of some early flowering things, and there's some perennials that are in here, other perennials that are in here as well, that will kind of take over this area as these bulbs fade out. And we don't have to worry about cutting them back because we really won't see them all that much. This one's a really fun early flowering native. This was Sanguinaria canadensis, or bloodroot is the common name for it. These are native from Florida up to Nova Scotia and out toward the middle of the country. We're filming this early in the morning, and you'll notice these flowers are closed up. It's a white flower with a yellow center that's quite beautiful, but if you're filming in the evening or filming early in the morning, those flowers are closed up, and then they'll open during the day. It's just a great little woodland native perennial. And over to the left of it, there's some epimedium. I showed pruning it last week, and so by getting this foliage off the top of it, these flowers are allowed to really stand out here. And again, this is going to just getting started. It'll be pretty much solid yellow here in the next week or two. Bloom for a little while, and then the new foliage will come out, and the foliage looks great all season. Daffodils are one of Steph's absolute favorite flowers. She'll tell you that she just wants one that would bloom all year long. There's always cut daffodils in the house during this time of year, and we have a ton of them out here in the garden, and this is one of her absolute favorites. This one's called Tahiti. It's just got these little highlights of orange with that yellow kind of semi-double flower. Really great one. This is one where we didn't follow our own advice, and it's on the southern edge of the property back here, and most of the flowers are facing the neighbor's house, the direction that the morning sun is coming from. So again, we didn't follow our own rule on that, but this is Tahiti, one of Steph's absolute favorites amongst her favorite flowers. The orange flowering osmanthus, as the new growth comes out on it, it's just this vibrant, really vibrant, almost purple color. It's a reddish purple color. And then when the sun's hitting it here in the morning, the highlights are just absolutely incredible. This one is pretty much finished flowering at this point, and it's in a little too much shade, so it's not flowering quite as much as it would otherwise. I got to do a little tip. I'll do a little tip pruning on this as it's coming. As it's finished flowering now, and that'll force some more growth down at the bottom. I did that once last year, and it's quite a bit fuller than it was. So I'll just keep doing that. I'm gonna hold the height back a little bit, and that should continue to branch more down at the bottom. But I love this thing right as it's leafing out in the spring. This is more typical of how hyacinths come back for us in the garden. The foliage will be twice as big as it normally is, where it's trying to get light, and the flowers will be, less flowers on them. This variety is called Carnegie, and it's quite nice the first season it's in the ground, and then again, it just comes back weird here in the south because it's just not getting the cold treatment that it needs. Up above that, the Osmanthus fragrans is still absolutely in full bloom, new growth, covered in new growth. This is March like 10th or something as I'm shooting this, and we're another 5 weeks before our average last frost date, so it's almost certainly it'd be highly unusual if this foliage didn't get set back in some way. This is way ahead of where it should be, but it is still in full flower. I can smell it right now, even though it's early in the morning. Typically more like in midday, later day. You can smell these little teeny tiny flowers, kind of an orangey scent to them, cast out over the whole garden. You can smell these way before you can see them because the flower is not very showy, but it's incredibly fragrant. And I love any Osmanthus as it's leafing out in the spring, even variegated ones. They're all super, super interesting. The new foliage that comes out on them has interesting hues. This may be my favorite daffodil in the garden. This one's called Tom Pouse. It has almost 3 colors. It has that kind of yellow, the yellow petals, and then kind of this toward the center of the petals, it's white. It has a little bit of a white hue to it, and then that corolla is that orangey, peachy orange color. It really is a standout here in the garden, and they stand up big and tall, show off from a long distance. Those have been kind of trapped between a couple of shrubs because originally when they were planted, they were the shrubs were much smaller, and actually both shrubs that are next to it are going to get a little bit of pruning going forward. At some point though, we're probably going to have to dig those daffodils out and replant them a little further forward in the bed. Just to the right of those, the Purple Daydream Loropetalum is pretty much in full bloom at this point. That one's almost red. It's definitely pink flowers, but it leans almost toward red. The nice thing about Purple Daydream is that the purple foliage goes all the way down into the center of the plant. A lot of the old purple foliage Loropetalum were kind of green down in the middle and then purple out on the new growth. This one has the purple all the way through it, and the flowers really stand out against it. Of course, when the flowering's done, new growth will start on it, but that's the growth habit of that thing. I've had to do very little pruning on it. That's the first Loropetalum I've ever planted in a garden where you could tell the form was definitely going to be dwarf. A lot of the older ones that were sold kind of, you know, saying that they could be kept 3 or 4 feet tall, had a lot of vertical growth on them, and you could tell. But this one is definitely more spreading than it is upright. Next up is the Emerald Snow Loropetalum, which is more just getting started. It's got some open flowers on it, but they're kind of a greenish white color to start with, and then they just get whiter and whiter. This is another dwarf, but with green foliage instead of purple foliage, and the white really stands out against that green. We've loved this plant, and there's no plant in this garden that's been more abused than this one. This one's been moved. I think this is the 3rd location for this plant, and I moved it during August or July. I don't remember what exact month it was, but it was a definite a time of year that was not ideal to be moving it, and it lost a few leaves and then immediately flushed back out and started blooming again. These fondant hyacinths were put in this year, and they had cold treatment before they went in, so you can see how the foliage is much more diminutive than the one that had come back from last year, and the flowers are more condensed and compact. It rained last night. It rained yesterday, so they're leaned over. They'll stand back up as they dry out this morning. But this is a really beautiful one, and I don't expect, again, hyacinths and hybrid tulips just tend to be annuals for us. We treat them as annuals, and we're pleased when they do come back and show off a 2nd or 3rd year, but we know that there is a time. They're definitely going to expire at some point. This one is similar to that Hawara that we saw out in the front garden. This one's called Baby Boomer. These are actually almost finished flowering, and I can already see the foliage is even started to slow down as well on it, but we had a few flowers left on it, figured we'd show them off. This is another one of those daffodils that has the multiple flowers up on top. And so the flowers are small, individually smaller, but they're incredibly showy. A week ago, this was just full on yellow there for a couple of weeks. And again, it's slowing down as other ones are just starting to bloom. I would say I really love this time of year, and I do love this time of year when everything is kind of waking up and overlapping just a bit. It's really an interesting time of year, but this is a little early for a lot of these things to be doing what they're doing here in the garden. But you know, it is what it is. We had a very, very mild winter. We had some cold and then just came out of it, and it's just been kind of mild ever since then. The mountain snow, Pieris, is probably peak flower today. I'd call this peak flower. Showed it off last week, and it still had just a lot of few open flowers, but buds. I don't see any more flower buds on it, but and I actually starting to see the new growth on it. Once you start to see that new growth on it, typically the flowers are going to start to fade. But right beside it is a spring ephemeral. This is a May apple. We have the native May apples out here, and we have some Chinese May apples as well. And it's really dry back here. They don't particularly like dry, but we've been able to amend this soil a little bit over time, and it seems like it's happier coming out of the ground this year than it has been in the past. But several spring ephemerals out here in the garden, and then a few of the hellebores at this point are finishing up, but still incredibly showy out here. And then one thing that has hit the ground running back here in this dry shade is this pulmonaria. I would have thought it would have been one of the many perennials we've tried back here that would like more moist condition, but this one has this one's called Silver Bouquet, and it's just really fantastic. I love a lot of these pulmonaria have this multiple colors. The flowers are, as they open, they evolve into different colors, so it has an appearance that it has lots of different multiple colored flowers on the same plant. But variegation's beautiful. I think we have another variety that we're about to put in the ground that'll be in an upcoming video as well. We've got actually quite a few plants that are going into the garden, and there's a few blank spaces back here on this back line that'll be perfect for that other pulmonaria that we got that has slightly larger foliage than this one. So there you go. What's looking good in your garden, in your area at this point? We have, again, it's a lot overlapping. A lot of the early flowering things are kind of finishing, and then the spring flowering things are just waking up and getting started. Again, thank you so much for following along with the channel. We're going to have mulches coming. As you're watching this, we'll probably be in the process of mulching the garden, and so the next videos you see, it's going to have a little bit more of a polished look than it has right now. Thanks for watching.